I know people are going to be trickling in, but we have so much that we want to share this evening, and we're so excited to have this panel here. I don't want to waste any time. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chris Walsh Center ADHD Panel Insights, Lived Experience, and Practical Tools for Support. My name is Therese Acton Roberts, and I am the coordinator for the Chris Walsh Center for Educators and Families at Framingham State University. Before Natalie will be introducing tonight's panelist, I'd like to share a little bit about the Chris Walsh Center. Since 2020, our center has been dedicated to supporting families and educators, providing resources and programs that focus on mental health and educational services for students with disabilities, gifted students, and those with unmet needs. Over the past 5 years, we have empowered thousands of families, professionals, and educators through our work. Our mission: the center is committed to serving our community by providing information and support to families and educators about the full spectrum of educational services available to students with disabilities, gifted students, and students with unmet needs. We offer workshops, programming, research opportunities, professional development for families, educators, and student support professionals, administrators, and advocates throughout Massachusetts. Tonight's event is made possible from a generous grant from the Framingham State Association, Alumni Association. As much of our work is funded through grants, your feedback is essential in helping us continue our valuable programs like this one. Later in this event, you'll be provided an online link for a short survey. We greatly appreciate your participation. We will leave about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. If you would like to speak during the Q&A session, please use the raise your hand feature, and we'll invite you to do so. Importantly, speaking during the event makes you part of the recording that we will be posting to YouTube. Otherwise, if you prefer to type your questions in the comment, please feel free to type them in the chat at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect them, and Natalie will be reading them during the Q&A session. So our moderator tonight is the Chris Walsh Center, one of the Chris Walsh Center's graduate students, Natalie McCollum. Natalie will be graduating from FSU's Master's in Counseling Psychology program in May. She's already accepted a position at Art Relief in Waltham, Massachusetts, where she'll specialize in providing neurodiversity, disability, and LGBTQIA plus affirming mental health care to clients with ADHD and/or autism. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Natalie, where she'll introduce tonight's panelists.
Alrighty, so as Trace said, I'm Natalie, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So in no particular order, we have, we have Becca Gibson, LICSW, LCSW, did you say the dash C? Use it, and they, she pronouns, and is an autistic and ADHD licensed independent clinical social worker and the founder of Wired Differently Therapy, where they serve clients in Maryland and Massachusetts. Erin Nelke, LCPC, uses she, her pronouns and is a licensed clinical professional counselor. The first one is in Maryland and the second one is in Washington, D.C. And a clinical supervisor, co-founder and owner of Melanated Wellness, LLC, located in, Gaithersburg, Maryland. At Melanated Wellness, Erin's mission is to place particular emphasis on better serving and empowering the Black, neurodiverse, and LGBTQIA plus communities. Brendan Mahan, MED, hosts the ADHD Essentials podcast and is an internationally recognized expert on ADHD, executive function, anxiety, and neurodiversity. Carolyn McGuire, ACCG, do you say MED or MED? Sorry, guys, I should have figured this out before.
No, MED, Master's in
MED, all
Education.
right. So Caroline is an award-winning author, coach, teacher, and keynote speaker whose work has inspired important conversations about social skills, friendship, and belonging. And her book, Why Will No One Play With Me, has won several awards, including the Best Book Award from American Book Fest, Mom's Choice Award for Honoring Excellence, and Book Authority's Award for Best ADHD Books of All Time. Caroline's next book for adult friendship skills for the neurodivergent, A Guide for the Quirky, Anxious, and Easily Distracted, will be out in April 2026. And then Dr. Carolyn Linsky Parcells is a board-certified pediatrician and owner and president of Our Place Adolescent and Young Adult Health, a multifaceted clinic dedicated to meeting the physical and emotional needs of adolescents and young adults. As a physician with nearly 20 years of experience, a teacher and mother with ADHD, and a learning disability herself, she has deep commitment to caring for individuals and families with ADHD, as well as improving the care they receive by educating patients, parents, medical and mental health providers, coaches, teachers, community leaders, and anyone else who will listen, and on occasion, those who won't. And Caroline is going to be joining us, Carolyn is going to be joining us a little bit later. So, and now we'll jump on over to questions. So, to get started, we're basically just going to do some introduction and stuff related to self-understanding. And so our first question is, what role do you think social media plays in self-understanding for neurodivergent people and those who suspect they may be neurodivergent?
I'll speak to this. I think that, firstly, neurodivergent is a really broad term. It encompasses so many different things. And I recognize that that's not actually the entirety of what we're talking about tonight. So I'm going to focus more on ADHD in particular. But I think that a lot of people, especially people who were socialized as female growing up or had more inattentive ADHD presentations, have lived for a really long time in their lives as kids, teens, not necessarily recognizing that some of the traits that they had were ADHD. I know that was true for me, that I was told I had depression when I was a kid, and it wasn't until I was like 28 that I even got diagnosed with ADHD. And so for a lot of people, when they're on social media, I think seeing other people speak about traits and putting a name to what it is can be really validating, especially if they haven't heard it or understood some of where that's coming from, feeling like things are just harder or they're working really hard and they're still having these issues. Like, I keep trying to be on time, but no matter how hard I try, I just can't seem to show up when everyone else is there and everyone gets mad at me. And seeing someone post a video, even if they're not a professional, but just talking about how they learned that that's ADHD in conjunction with a bunch of other traits, right? Not just one thing that happens to some people, regardless of neurotype. I think it can be really validating. And honestly, professional diagnosis with like a neuropsych or having someone do an evaluation, even if they're not a psychologist, can be really inaccessible. There's really long wait times. Insurance tends not to cover neuropsych assessments or testing for ADHD in adults because it's considered a neurodevelopmental condition. So it's like a kid's thing, even though it's really true for adults too. So people might have to pay thousands of dollars to get a formal diagnosis. And some people are just able to see online, oh, this might actually explain some of what's happening for me that before I was told was anxiety, depression, trauma, etc.
Can I piggyback? Is that okay?
Of course.
I completely agree that the power of social media to help people feel seen and validated for their neurodiverse experiences is incredibly important. And we have to be careful, right? Because especially after COVID, like COVID hit and a whole bunch of people came on social media who are like, I know what's up with ADHD, whatever else, because I have it, and started saying like, yeah, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you probably have ADHD because like they have ADHD and play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're making this connection that is not really there. Um, so as much as there's a lot of good stuff with social media, there's also like we have to tread carefully because the Dungeons and Dragons example is like minor. That's pretty obvious that it doesn't connect, but there's some stuff that seems like it would connect that may or may not. And you've just got a bunch of people who aren't haven't been through like advanced degree programs to better understand stuff and are haven't studied ADHD outside of they have it and they watched a bunch of TikTok videos. And so I always want to say like we have to be careful of our sources and make sure that we're listening to reliable ones.
Can I piggyback too?
Of course, yeah.
I think, as somebody who works with people on friendship and belonging and social skills, I think one of the most important things, I second everything Brendan said, and please like check your sources, because there are credible sources out there. But I do think what it helps with is not to feel so siloed, to feel, there's ways in which instead of driving to an ADHD support group, we can have them online instead of feeling like you're completely alone. And I just had this experience with an ADHD community where the person had posted something and there was a conversation of like 8,000 people all weighing in, boop, 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 and it moved so fast. And there was this sense of me too, and this sense of I'm not so different because in the matter of minutes, there was an explosion of like 8,000 people who said, and that's minor, that's small, right? Of like, wow, I feel this way too. So I think there's so many different dynamics to it, but I think one of the biggest is that you can be in a place where you feel kind of unsupported. Maybe your family doesn't get it. Maybe, you're in a town that doesn't get it. But every, week you can log into a group where everybody gets it and people support you. And I think, I've been diagnosed since I was about 25 and I'm north of 25. And I would say this, when I was first diagnosed and I was younger, there wasn't that community. There wasn't that sense of like, it's okay that you use a body double, which is a way to get things done where I literally work in parallel with someone. There was just this like, oh, Caroline does that. And you felt very much that you were the only person in the world who needed this. And what I like about social media, downsides are there, right? Is that instead of me feeling like I'm the only person who's doing this, I now know that there are millions of people doing this. So I think that's the benefit of it is that you feel less isolated and more part of a community, even if your community doesn't support you like they should.
And I think, I obviously don't think someone who's watching a video with one person talking about their own lived experience with ADHD should be used to self-diagnose. But I do think that the research is pretty clear that for people who, even if they aren't engaging with like medical provider content, walking away feeling more like you were talking about, Caroline, like connected, a part of, less like ashamed, less like it's just a them problem. I think being able to experience that sense of, oh, this isn't a personal failing, this is something that's happening beyond that, is really, really important.
Yeah, I don't want to come across like I'm trying to say social media is terrible. I'm not. I always have to caveat it a little bit because it's, as a guy who works really hard to make sure his stuff is pretty well vetted and has like meaningfulness and validity behind it. Not everyone's doing that, and it is a pet peeve.
100%. And to your point, the research shows that the ADHD speakers on social media, the ones with, I hate to like put an educational piece on this, but like there is one, while recognize the systemic issues with accessing education, that people who are medical providers, therapists, people who are educators tend to provide more accurate content
Mm-hmm.
about ADHD online, and can maybe double checking with some of those content creators in
Right.
addition to whoever can kind of be that balance.
Yeah,
So-
and like, I mean, Jessica McCabe's stuff is great, right? And she's not rocking in advanced degrees and things. So there is certainly people out there, and those folks are vetted and been around for a while. And yeah,
So thank you guys so much for your answers. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to our next question. So how do cultural and community norms shape which ADHD traits are accepted versus which ones are stigmatized?
productivity.
Yeah, I could definitely speak to this one, but I'm only gonna, speak from my experience being a Black American. But growing up, there wasn't neurodivergence. You definitely wore your label, whether that was bad, lazy, or it's just special. You kind of were known by your affliction. Growing up in the Black community, and so that definitely, even still today, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in the field, is to help destigmatize and also decolonize not only Western therapy, but also how we view developmental disorders or, neurodivergence. And so that's what I kind of do. I kind of, sit with my parents and my kiddos. I don't really work with kids. I work with teenagers and older adults. And like you all were talking about social media, I've had a lot of folks come to me because of content creators and like, oh, I'm ADHD. Oh, I think I'm ADHD. And we'll have that, that conversation because it does look different in different groups. And I was, under the exception that, it definitely, neurodivergence was always seen as a European American, thing. It wasn't part of us. It didn't belong to us. And so kind of figuring out what those different expressions and traits look like in Black folks versus non-Black folks is also something that's coming up more as well. And so, the cultural norms is that we keep everything in house. And if you especially grew up in the church, you went to church. And so I'm a big believer if you can have Jesus and a therapist, right? And so folks that look like me having workshops like this, where we have a diverse group of individuals, can also start help build some community norms around whether these traits are either accepted or stigmatized. Like myself, I was diagnosed as an adult in my 30s. I never knew I was ADHD. I thought I was just a sensitive, shy kid. And I would have never thought until I came across other Black folks that were ADHD. If I just stayed in the professional world, I probably would have never actually been in a conversation where someone was like, oh, you might be neuro divergent. And so that can, with that stigmatizing, it can lead to the isolation. So that's where the social media comes in, and finding folks that look like you and are going through the things that you are going through can be helpful with not feeling siloed or feeling pretty isolated. But we definitely have a lot more work to do around destigmatizing ADHD traits, especially in our Black and brown kiddos. For those who are not familiar, definitely look into the school to prison pipeline. And for those who are not aware of it, I just encourage you to look into it. But it's the system for funneling Black and brown kids from a young age to prison. They kind of identify what's going on in your world, both in school and out of school, kind of funnel you based off that. That's why resources are being removed from communities and schools. So that way you have kids who are going to go off to college. You have kids that, are eventually going to turn to a life of crime, especially those who live in overly policed areas, which can continue to perpetrate and stigmatize how ADHD and other mental challenges show up in those communities.
Thank you, Erin. So I'm going to piggyback off of that and ask our next question because it's also about traits. And that way, if anyone has any more to add, you can go ahead and do that. So, and I'm actually going to combine these two. So what are some early signs of ADHD that often get missed in children? And then what are some of the signs of ADHD that get missed in adults or might get like overlooked or misinterpreted? And so I'll just invite you when you answer to speak to like, is this a child thing? Is it an everybody? Is it an adult thing? So, and turn it over to you guys.
I would love to speak to this. I think I would talk about children first. One of the things that we know is that girls and women are woefully underdiagnosed. And I think that there's a tendency to, I think that teachers are wonderful, and I think teachers are way overtaxed. And I think a lot of times educators are not given the education about these things, and parents aren't either. So they have good intentions. I always think people come from the best place, but I do know that the way that we look at ADHD traits tends to be as if everyone is hyperactive. And Erin just spoke so beautifully to the fact that not everybody is hyperactive. And in women and girls, there tends to be an overdiagnosis on anxiety. Not that we're not anxious, we are anxious, but we're anxious because we can't meet your social norms and your societal expectations. So we're aware and therefore we're anxious. And I think that there's a tendency also not to understand that something I always say is if kids could do it, they would do it. And I think that there's not that sort of expectation. I think children really want to please adults. And to me, there's so many glaring flags. And I would just encourage any parent, if you feel in your gut there's something is wrong, seek help, because so often parents come and they sit in this office and they say, I worried in kindergarten, I worried in fourth grade, I worried in fifth grade, I worried in sixth grade. And even if someone tells you that they're sure your kid is fine, check the source. Like Brendan said earlier, are they a professional who diagnoses and knows about ADHD? Because I think a lot of times parents do have a gut that there's something up, but they don't have the knowledge. And that's not their fault. That's okay. So I think I'd just say like the traits tend to be stigmatized toward the hyperactive and sort of behavioral problems. I never got in trouble one day in my entire life, and I turned in my homework. It wasn't great homework. I won't claim it was well done, but I always turned it in. So, we can't go off sort of those kind of things. And a lot of times I hear people saying to parents, well, she does her homework, so she can't possibly be ADHD. And that's just not true.
Yeah, I think I'm an inattentive one, and I think in adults, part of the challenge is the traits that get more stigmatized. I think the couples that I work with a lot of neurodiverse couples, or some of the individual adults that I work with come and get told by partners, bosses, friends, like, you never pay attention, you don't remember my birthday, like feedback about things that impact their relational development, or you have such a hard time staying calm, like that emotion dysregulation. But it's interesting because executive functioning challenges and emotion regulation, which are two really big pieces of ADHD, regardless of subtype, aren't explicitly named in the DSM for diagnostic criteria, but they are some of the traits that we see the most talked about, the most challenges. So memory, organization, planning, and often in family dynamics, when you have kids that are ADHD and parents that maybe don't know they're ADHD, you see them sort of accelerating. Like a kid gets dysregulated and the parent doesn't know how to regulate. So then they get dysregulated, and then the kid's more up there, and then the parent's more up there. And before you know it, it's really out of control. and both of them walk away feeling like, what just happened? So also recognizing some of those relational dynamics might not show up until you're past your limit, right? You can maintain up until a point, and then one too many things gets put on your plate and you can't maintain in the same way anymore, which is part of what we see as people get older, and especially with people who are socialized as girls and women. We see it around hormonal changes too. So different points in the menstrual cycle is when executive function changes because your dopamine changes, your estrogen changes, and that can look like just PMS, like you're just moody, you're just irritable, when it's really a function of the ADHD.
Yeah, so much of what gets stigmatized for ADHD is the way it impacts other people, right? Like my ADHD causes me to forget something, my ADHD causes me to be late or whatever. And now because I've impacted someone else, now it's a problem, right? Like before everybody showed up, I was talking about how I blew myself up today. I was grilling and I turned the gas on, and an ADHD trait that lots of people don't know about, but certainly affects adults, is we lose track of time. And I just went over to get something, and I just was over there too long. So when I hit the ignition, a fireball blew out of my grill and like burned half of my hair off. And so that didn't matter because nobody was there, right? I was the only one who got burned. And as long as we're the ones who get burned, we've learned that like that can be managed. But if my wife had been there and she got burned, now my ADHD is a huge deal, right? Like now it's because admittedly, I don't want to blow my wife up because I love her very much.
Good to hear.
But like that's the nature of ADHD, right? When what affects us ends up bleeding out and affecting other people, now we're getting stigmatized. And like that goes into masking, that goes into how well we can regulate. So yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and jump in. Yes.
So, hi, everybody. Speaking of ADHD, hi, I'm Dr. Carolyn Lynch Parcells, and I had the wrong time zone. So, anywho, I'm on the central time zone. I did catch what Brendan was saying, though, and I'm guessing we're talking about the stigmatization. And
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about stigma, and then we are on a question about overlooked or misinterpreted signs and signals of ADHD, but feel free to talk to those topics.
Because women and girls fit both of those. Because women and girls, so we were excluded from a lot of the original research. And yes, sure, there's probably some misogyny involved in that. But part of what I actually want all of you guys to understand about research and why there is so little research for women across all health topics is because, sure, yes, men were the ones doing the research initially, but also because the theory was our hormonal variations were an additional experimental factor that they wanted to control for. And the assumption was whatever data was gathered from men and boys could be extrapolated, okay, to women, which of course we now know is bull honkadonk on so many different levels for so many different health situations. But coming back around to kind of so real quick, the stuff that's so women tend to mask more. We also tend to internalize symptoms more, so we're just not as obvious. But the reason I chimed in, or I kind of raised my hand as quick as I did, besides just to introduce myself, was what Brendan was talking about with stigma. And I think I tell people this all the time, and yes, I treat people with ADHD. I also am an adult woman with ADHD. I'm a mother, I'm a business owner, I'm a physician. And I'm very open with people that I feel like my ADHD causes me more difficulty now than it ever has at any other point in my life. And the reason is for exactly what Brendan was talking about, because now my ADHD affects other people. It affects my family, it affects my business, it affects my staff, my patients, what have you. And as women, for better, for worse, right, wrong, or otherwise, we are still expected to carry the majority of the emotional load of our families. We're expected to manage everybody's calendars, whether we work or not. We're expected to do a lot of things that require a lot of executive function. And so when we struggle with those things, not only does it affect other people, and that brings shame and guilt onto us, but we're also judged. and we can be judged pretty harshly. And because of rejection sensitivity, we can think we're being judged whether we are or not. So that's fun. That's great. Yeah.
But that feeling of like thinking we're being judged, even if we're not, comes from countless instances of being judged for exactly those things over and over again. Like, I can't tell you how many times when I was growing up, everyone would get mad at me in the family because they'd be sitting in the car. My mom would have prompted me like 15, 20 times. Are you in the shower yet? Have you gotten dressed yet? Oh, like, do you have what you're wearing picked out? We're going in 10 minutes. We're going in 5 minutes. And everyone's waiting in the car and I'm not there. And what's the narrative? She doesn't care about the rest of the family. Everyone else is focused on getting ready on time. And Becca isn't paying attention to that. So over time, that's how we're going to feel. We're going to feel sensitive to those criticisms.
Yep. So a little tip, my wonderful insight from my ADHD children. One time when I lost my you-know-what over the same thing with them, which I hate doing that because I know how that feels. However, and my oldest said, Mom, it doesn't work when you give us warnings. And I said, why not? And he goes, because that makes us think we have time. We can't keep track of time. And I'm like, no joke. I taught you that. He's like, I said, so what do you want me to do? He's like, just tell us we have to go. Don't give us a warning. Tell us we have to go. We have to go right now, like 15 minutes before we actually have to go. And I'm like, why did I not think of that?
What is it?
Thank you, a wise child.
Isn't it ADHD 2.0 that says, that says we have now and not now?
All right, I'm going to jump in with a personal story too. So sorry, guys. Yeah, we do the piggybacking off of each other. I just have to go get something. I just have to go get something. I just have to go get something. And then forever later, I'm like, nobody is allowed to go get anything else or do anything else. We all must move towards the door.
And that's a thing I talk about in a lot of capacities, right? One is with parents, I'm like, the morning routine with your kids should always be heading towards the door. If your kid, if at any point in the morning routine they're going backwards, especially if they're going back upstairs, if you're on a 2-story house, you got to change that. I've had parents who bought like extra toothbrushes and toothpaste and stuff to put in the downstairs bathroom so the kids don't go back upstairs because it ruins stuff. And I've got a client who's a husband who like all kinds of conflict with his wife, right? And I'm like, whenever you're leaving the house, just don't go back towards into the house. Like, only be heading out of the house and your relationship with your wife will get better. And it's working. My 2 big advice for men are that one and go to sleep with your wife.
Keep a brush in the car. And
I was just going to say, I keep toothbrushes in the car. But so a salient point about this though is there's a lot of stigma about doing things differently. And if I could wish one thing for this audience, it would be, I don't care what other people do. I care what I have to do. And so when it comes to executive function, like, I'm sure my neighbor whose little girls don't have ADHD does not have toothbrushes stashed in her glove box, right? Along with extra swim caps, along with many other things that we've come to need. And if I could just grant one thing, if I were queen, I would allow everybody to rid themselves of that stigma. Because if you need to be heading out the door, if you need to have toothbrushes in your car and hairbrushes and all kinds of other stuff, then that's what you do, and that works for you. And I just find that sometimes there's a lot of sort of little comments that people make, but I'm an ADHD expert, so I tend to be like a little Teflon-y about it. But I know other people, like my clients, take it in and feel really bad. But if it works, it works. So that's my only, I just want to say, like, don't feel bad. If I could wave a wand and make you not feel bad, because toothbrushes in the car, I'm sorry, it works.
My youngest,
they don't exist.
No, my
Like,
youngest
what
solution.
will they think? They don't exist.
No, my youngest solution to running around not being able to find our shoes in the morning was to take his shoes off in my car before he gets out of the car and leave his shoes in the car. Freaking brilliant. Freaking brilliant. Why
Well,
didn't I
that's
think of
the
that?
thing.
Right?
We don't think inside the box. So why are we trying to come up with solutions that fit inside it? It doesn't work for us.
Definitely, man. I do the same thing with my little humans. We have like a routine, not necessarily a routine, but we have ways to get out of the house. And then I saw something, I'm in a group on Facebook that for people who struggle to get to places on time, they put it like with Waze, you have a leave later in the app and you can just put the time that you need to be there. So then they start getting ready. So by the time it takes them an hour to get ready, they have their time to leave the house on time so they can get to where they're going. So
And then
like
add another 15 minutes anyway.
right, for traffic, right? Especially living in the DMV area. But like Becca was saying, is like we have to think outside of the box. We have to get creative. Like toothbrushing is a struggle for my children, so I do it with them. And so when I go to brush my teeth, I'm like, nope, we're all going. I don't care what you're doing right now. We're all going to get up and go brush our teeth together. So that way they are brushing their teeth without it being like a power struggle of did you wash teeth or the constant reminder. Because my children, they listen with one ear and one eye. So if I'm doing the thing, then I make them do the thing with me, and that kind of it helps everybody in the whole household.
So I'm actually going to jump ahead to our question on this topic. So you guys have already answered some of it, but I'm going to invite you to add more if you want to. So we do have a question of what are some practical strategies you recommend to support building skills related to the challenges of ADHD, such as executive functioning challenges, but obviously you guys are speaking to a lot of these, but I'm going to guess you guys have some more practical strategies. So
Don't ignore sensory stuff. Oh my God, the sensory stuff causes so much drama, right? Like, and it's all over the place. I've got clients who don't want to wash dishes unless they're wearing rubber gloves because that it's icky and gross without the gloves on. Erin mentioned toothbrushing. I brush my teeth with my kids because I have trouble remembering to brush my teeth, but they don't, so they're my anchors. And I have two different toothbrushes, one that's powered and one that's regular, depending on what kind of a sensory experience I need to get me engaged enough to brush my teeth. Um, like my kid doesn't like hamburgers, not because he doesn't like the taste of it, but because the texture of it doesn't work for him. So anything that's like a hamburger texture, he doesn't like it. Just getting to know what's the sensory stuff and how can we either avoid the stuff that isn't working so well or lean into the stuff that does work is pretty significant. And because is in Massachusetts, I'm going to plug something real quick. There's an event coming up in September called CalmerCon, CalmerCon, which is a sensory sensitive pop culture comic book convention in Weston, Massachusetts. It's CalmerCon.org, I think.
Brendan,
Maybe
can
com.
you send that
I'll
to
check.
me and I'll include it in our follow-up email for
Yeah.
everybody?
So it's just a good thing for folks to know about. I'm on the board of directors for it. So
I have something on that point and something else. So in terms of the sensory aspect, I think one of the challenges that happens is that so many people in the household tend to have different sensory profiles. So also being aware that like what works for you sensory wise might be the opposite of what works for your kid or your spouse or the dog, and being able to tap into if there seems to be a lot of challenges around something, consider whether sensory is a piece. Because I know growing up, that was not something that I was taught was an aspect, but having my loop earplugs, having things that can help me makes a huge difference. Like if my partner is using the blender, like being able to accommodate for those kinds of things. And I think one of the best executive functioning hacks that I've learned was separating like mail or documents, lists, which are all the bane of my existence, by things that need to get done today, things that need to get done this week, and things that need to get done at some point, because breaking things down in a more tangible way like that helps me to organize when otherwise I have no idea what's more important. I don't know what information is most important to share with you because there's so much of it running through my head. I don't know what I want to do first because it's all relevant, it's all important, but being able to kind of look at it by time, deadline, importance that's more tangible helps give me a starting point.
So if I could piggyback on what Becca was just saying. So a couple things. So first of all, I am in one of those families where half of us need the captions on the movie and the other half can't stand the captions on the movie. Some of us are auditorily sensitive and some of us fidget vocally, because that's a thing, in case you didn't know. Yeah, it's great. It's awesome. It's fabulous. And we're all emotionally dysregulated. Fantastic. Highly recommend. So that I completely agree with the sensory stuff. And I think the sensory stuff too, not only can you lean into that as well, right? But it can also be that thing that's underlying a challenge that you're having difficulty getting over, and people don't necessarily know how to express it or even know that that's a thing. So knowing to ask those questions can be really, really helpful. But the other thing you said, and I'm having an ADHD moment.
Male importance, timelines.
Yes, thank you. Okay, awesome sauce. Thank you very much. Go team. By the way, that conversation happens in my house. Like I figured out for myself that working with people, whether it's body doubling, whether it's a personal assistant, whether it's staff in my office, whether it's just friends, that is awesome for me. Okay. So I have actually, and I know not everybody has the opportunity to do this, but there are a lot of opportunities out there for personal assistants and they are very affordable. If you cannot afford a personal assistant, you can find a friend. And I am a big fan of build your village, find your people, ADHD or not, who have a skill set you don't have for the thing that you don't like to do. And you have a skill set for the thing they don't like to do. And Avengers assemble. Okay? I cannot tell you how much that has changed my personal life. But it really, you can build that team, whether it's simply friends or family or people you pay, whatever it is. I think that's really helpful. I'm also a huge fan of, and I know my colleagues and friends on this call will appreciate this, coaching. ADHD coaching for developing, like, because I'm sure a lot of people are like, well, where do you even start? Right? And how do you figure out what works for you? And how do you know what to lean into? And I think ADHD coaching can be absolutely priceless when it comes to helping folks figure that out.
Oh, my other thing is to have multiple systems. So when your system stops being effective,
because it will,
you have another one. Oh, it totally will. And it might be in 2 weeks or it might be in 2 months. Who knows? But that way you don't have to try and create a system when you're already tanked mentally. You already have the next couple lined up. And if you have a few that are developed, maybe in conjunction with a friend or a professional, then you can kind of pick, which gives you a little dopamine boost too.
I'll tie that back to shame, because I prep my patients and their families that this is an ongoing process and you will find something that works. And maybe occasionally you'll find something that works long term, and that's great. But know that it may not work forever, and it likely won't. And when it stops working, that's okay. It's not failure. It's just time to move on to the next system. Because I think that's another thing that we will often shame ourselves on, is like, well, I had something that worked and I stopped using it. Like, I suck.
I think there's a great tip for that. A colleague of mine, Barbara Luther, came up with that is called resparkalizing. So part of the reason that, we have a system, it's going well, and then it doesn't give us enough dopamine anymore, and we get bored with it, or we forget that it really worked, whatever the reason may be. There's myriad reasons. And then it's just not exciting enough anymore. And she always says to resparkleize it. So whatever you need to do to make it feel exciting again, and because sometimes those systems, I completely co-sign what Becca said, but I also think like sometimes those systems are really good systems, and but we get bored. Let's face it, interest is a factor here, and especially with kids, one of the things I find is that just when you think everything is working and we're like cooking with gas and we're like, oh my God, we're turning in our homework, the world is moving forward, like we're doing whatever, is when they will sometimes an environment changes, and we know environment is very much a big factor, and then that's why they shift, or sometimes it just needs to be resparkleized. So I share that because I think it is like the single greatest ADHD hack, because for me, like just making it a little exciting again has really worked personally and also for my clients.
I just
And
wrote that
connected
word down because that's amazing.
It is.
and connected to that too, right? Like I'm not quite resparkleizing, I'm pre-sparkleizing, sort of, which is like one of the things I do for me, and I do it with my kids too, is if I do something and it makes me feel good after I do it, like the gym is a good example of this, I try to really remember how good it makes me feel after, so that the next time I don't want to do it, I can tap into this felt good, that even if it would just that was effective and worked, right? Like when I take some time to be mindful of why that thing worked and I do it consistently, then when I all of a sudden don't wanna anymore, I can tap into that and say, I know I don't wanna, and I really don't wanna, but I also know that this will work. So I'm going to do it anyway this time. And if it's really that bad, I don't have to do it next time. I can come up with something else. But I'm going to do it this time and see what happens. And invariably, it like worked, and I can kind of push through the I don't wannas.
I have a tip that I've learned. I didn't know it was a hack until recently, but I like to talk to myself. I don't know if any of you all do
All
have
the time. I have to
conversations.
apologize to my
Constant.
colleagues all the time. I'm sorry I'm narrating my day. Thankfully, they're very understanding.
Yeah, there, and I answer myself too. So I like to say present Erin likes to prepare for future Erin. And so I'll be doing something and I'll see something that I need to move or put somewhere else. And even if I don't want to do it in those moments, because sometimes I'm just like, I don't feel like doing that task, I'll do it because I'm like, I'm doing this for future Erin, because then future Erin is going to be looking for this particular item, and I'm going to put it in one of three places. Especially if you have a habit of losing things, you put it in a place where you typically tend to hide or like place things. And so then when future Erin looks at it, I'm like, thank you, past Erin, for placing this here, because you knew future Erin was going to look here. And I found that like my normal like hiding spots typically have those items there because my present self is planning for my future self. And then I thank myself, and then it makes me feel better. Like Brenda is saying, then I remember how good it feels to be like, good job planning for yourself. And then so I keep, and then I continue to do it. And I do it with my children too. Like when I tell them to go put your homework in your backpack, typically they'll just put it down on the table. Then days later, I can't find my homework. And I'm like, no, just do it right now. I know you don't feel like doing it in the moment, but your future self is going to thank you when you go to look in your backpack and find that your homework is there and it's not like under your bed somewhere.
Do
I
it
love
now
that
while you're
reframe.
thinking about it,
Yeah.
too. Do
But
it now while you're thinking about it before you forget about it.
Part of what
I
I
don't
think
always
is
do
great,
it, but
yeah, Erin, I love that though, because the messaging of it is positive,
Right.
right? You're doing it's not it's positive, and it's for yourself. It's not for anybody else. It's not because of any kind of, standard or this, that, or the other. It's, hey, this is for your future self. Your future self will appreciate that. And I love the positive messaging of that. I just think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think I was in my 40s when I figured out that organization was a love letter to future me, because I only experienced it as a giant pain in the ass right now. And like that, I didn't want to do it, right? I didn't want to put things where they should be and where they should go. And then I was like, no, wait, it's a love letter to future me. I should put this here later, because 2 years from now, when I can't find this, it'll be a horrible nightmare. And that'll take 3 hours. Whereas right now, it's going to take me 10 minutes or whatever to do this now.
Well, and it's interesting. It's like,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, when we talk about things like self-care, right? And a lot of times the conversation goes to things like, getting a massage or getting this or doing that. And it's like, okay, I can't remember who I heard say this. I can't take credit for it, but I unfortunately I can't credit the person who said it, but they were like, real self-care is doing the things that are hard for me now to make me in the future feel better or do better or be better or what have you, right? And so for folks with ADHD, that's the basics. It's sleep, it's nutrition, it's physical activity, but then it's also things like you were saying, Erin, like the future. Okay, no, I don't want to do this right now, but oh, the future me will be so happy that I did, right? And with the organization, Brendan, and things like that. And I'll be totally honest, I've been doing this for a long time. I've lived with ADHD for a long time. I've taken care of ADHD for a long time. And I'm kind of like, how the heck have I not used this messaging with myself? Because yes, please.
well, and I'll also just say that for some of this stuff, it's not that I don't want to do it. Often it's that I don't want to do it. But for some of it, it's that I really don't know how, or I didn't know how, and that it was something that needed to be learned, or I needed someone else to help assist me with developing a system because I got so overwhelmed by how many options came up in my head that I didn't know where to start. So sometimes it's don't wanna, and other times it's don't know how, but there's nothing wrong with getting supports like we touched on before. I know Carolyn, you were talking about that, like regardless of who it is, like we don't have to do all this alone. And I know for me, I kind of felt like I had to because my social relationships weren't that solid because of a lifetime of living with unmanaged, unsupported, and largely undiagnosed ADHD. And so being able to kind of find some of those people now, but also recognize that I've never been the person who has like those friendships from forever ago because that wasn't my experience. But I have made some cool friends in my adulthood who are other therapists or coaches, other professionals who I've been able to like learn a lot of really cool stuff from.
So I'm going to jump in. I am going to share 2 tips real quick, and then I'm going to move us to our next question. So one of my biggest ones, Brendan mentioned that time blindness earlier. I have alarms for everything. And depending on what it is, that alarm is set for different times ahead of the event. It's never exactly when it starts. So something like this, hopping on Zoom, my alarm's probably about 15 minutes ahead. I know I can snooze it once and use the bathroom. If I'm leaving to go somewhere, obviously that alarm has a longer snooze on it, but literally everything. And on Sundays, I have an alarm that goes off that says, check your weekly alarms, to remind me to double check and make sure there's an alarm that goes off before I'm supposed to meet with, I don't have one for every client I meet with, but before a block of clients, so that I know, okay, in 10 minutes, I need to start meeting with people, or particular meetings, things like that. I'm always using alarms. And then my other tip is for working with kids. For my own children, I always ask them, so they know some of these things, right? They live with me, right? They know some of these skills and tools I might implement, but I almost always ask them, if there's something I'm asking them to do, I'll say, what are you going to do so that you can remember that I asked you to do this? And that gives them that buy-in of they're offering which solution they're going to use, whether it's setting the alarm, whether it's writing a list, whatever feels most useful for them in that moment. Because again, multiple systems need to be available to us, but it helps them have that buy-in. So kind of using those counseling skills to get them to jump on in. But that said, we've talked about a lot of really interesting things and really practical things, but I want to ask you guys, what are some of the strengths you associate with people who have ADHD? And then I'll piggyback on that with our next question about like creating environments that support those strengths. So.
Wow, we all got really quiet.
No, I'll babble.
I just didn't want to jump on anybody else.
Yeah.
I was trying to be, yeah.
Because I have a tendency to do that. That's really funny though, because I think all of us did that at the same time, and that's really
All
funny.
masking.
I'm trying really hard not to be the dude on the panel who like doesn't let anyone else talk. And even when I piggybacked on Erin, I didn't say like Erin's point was dope as hell, and I should have, because it was. I was just like, yeah, and also this.
No.
But one strength that I find that a lot of people with ADHD have, that I think of as a side effect and sort of a trauma response, maybe, depending on how you want to look at it, is and Caroline's going to be like, what are you talking about, Brendan? I write whole books about this that run counter to what you're about to say. Some of us have really strong social skills.
No, some of us do. I would absolutely say that.
Yeah, because at least in my case, I'll use my personal life as an example, is the only reason I got out of middle school was I knew how to talk to my teachers and convince them that I did the homework assignment that I didn't do. And eventually lying felt bad and I stopped doing that. And I started taking, accountability for my misdeeds. But learning how to sort of talk to people so that they have your back when you've screwed up or didn't do it right or whatever, it's like a side effect, right? Like it doesn't necessarily come with ADHD, but it's one of the survival strategies that some of us pick up on, and it leads to some social skills.
Brendan, my ability to influence people and get them to do what I want is literally how I survived. And somebody can say that that's like on the darkest side manipulation, but it was
Me
really,
too.
it was really a skill of, I know that if I talk to you, like I can convince you that I don't need to write that paper on that really boring topic. I can write it on a much snazzier topic. But
Mhm.
I would say too, like one of the big things research shows about ADHD people, um, and autistic folks too, is that some of the communication stuff is mismatched communication. In other words, society expects us to communicate one way. We communicate another way.
Yep.
And so I just feel like I have to say this, like one of the things that research is just like exploding around is that if you tell people, and I call this a communication, so you don't have to say your diagnosis if you can't, you can say your needs, you can say, I'm the kind of person who, right?
Yeah.
And to explain your perspective and how you do things, the studies really show that people then go, oh, okay. Or as Brendan would say, dope. They're just like, oh, sure. Whereas otherwise, they fill in the story, and the story they fill in is not always good. And I'm not saying that there aren't stigmas, bullying, all those things. I'm not saying that. Live it every day. But what I am saying is there is this strength that we have in different areas that we can
Mhm.
also explain. Like, I'm a really data-driven person, right? So when we go somewhere, I need to know X or Y, or I could help you, Carolyn, with your stuff because I have this. So we have those
Great.
things, and those are really some of our superpowers. And we all have, I firmly believe we all have some gift that is off the charts. That is my experience with people with ADHD. We have some gift that is like no one else on the planet. And part of, I think, what we have to do is figure out that gift and be willing to sort of say to people, like, I'm not going to be the person who brings the appetizer because I may not be on time, but I will tell you what I am super great at, and here's what I can contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, completely agree with everything Caroline and Brendan said. And I think so first let me share a little story because you mentioned the communication stuff and autism. And I have a patient, one of my young adults with autism, and we were having conversation about how to assist this person in communicating with their family who is not autistic and does not understand autism, right? And my patient said the most brilliant thing. They go, "We are not the problem. We say what we mean. We do not use sarcasm. We do not use tone. They're like, we just say what we mean." She's like, "You people are the problem." And I was like, not wrong and touche. But I just thought that was a really fascinating kind of comment on an important comment on communication. But to then kind of piggyback on the other stuff, no two people with ADHD are the same, just like no two people are the same, right? And so yeah, there's some commonalities, but different symptoms are going to manifest differently and be more of a problem for some than for others, just like some gifts are going to manifest more for others than they do for other people. But I would say, and I do have to put on this because this is what I got at the last conference when it was in Anaheim, and I think it pretty much illustrates my gifts. This is also why I liked the resparkleize comment, because I do see myself as a sparkly unicorn. But no, I think a lot of us have the gift of creativity. We have the gift of energy, some of us. Some of us have the gift. I think the hyper focus can be both a gift and a curse all at the same time.
Oh, don't worry.
And I
That's my
think,
next question.
yeah, it can be a gift and a curse for sure. But the social stuff, and I wanted to circle back around to that because I do think one of our gifts, but also one of our challenges, is the concept of how we deal with details and bring in information. I actually hate that part of the diagnostic stuff is that we miss details because that's actually not quite right. What it is that we notice everything all at once and we have difficulty prioritizing or prioritizing details the way other people would or would want us to. And sometimes that causes problems for us, but other times it makes us really good physicians and diagnosticians or really good at whatever else we do because we see the details other people miss. We go down the rabbit hole other people won't go down. And to that point, back to what Brendan and Caroline both said about social skills, not everybody with ADHD struggles with social skills. Some kids are incredibly social, incredibly gregarious, are actually very good at picking up social cues. And what I've seen is actually, and I don't want to put them in two separate buckets because it's really a spectrum, right? There's the kids who don't pick up on as much of the social cues, and that can cause some social difficulties. On the other hand, they also tend to be the kids that aren't as easily embarrassed. And that can actually be a gift. And I've seen this in my family. The other side, the other extreme is those of us who pick up on all of it and all of the details and overanalyze it to the point of causing ourselves problems. And that's my side. And then we can be really sensitive to judgment of others. Are we even picking up on that judgment? Are they judging us, or is it just me? Is it just me being me? Is it just me being sensitive? I don't know. And that whole rejection sensitivity thing. But for those of us who lean towards the side of picking up on it, we also can learn how to use it. And that can, again, not even just from a manipulative standpoint or whatever, like that can be a really powerful gift. It's a gift I've used.
Yeah, I can. Just to piggyback what you're saying about the creativity, I think folks with ADHD are really good storytellers. Even if we might be tangential, we're gonna get to the point, but I think we're really good story.
But you're gonna love it.
You're gonna be entertained. You're gonna learn some things. You're gonna, find out some facts about yourself or some feelings. But I think we really are gifted, especially for those who are really big on the paying attention to detail. And like for myself, I'm super observant. Like I can read body language. I don't know if this is a trauma response or just a gift. I'm really big on body language. And so I can pick, even on camera, I can pick up on people's body, how they're feeling, how they're responding to what I'm saying or how I'm feeling. So I think that's very helpful for the work I do. But when I'm like out in public, if people are like, what are you doing? I'm observing. And I just like to observe and just kind of be in the space, but then it kind of knows who my people are. If I'm not out with like my friends, I kind of know who my people are, just observing what's kind of going on. And I think that's a strength of
So
I want to name
another.
Becca,
can I
go ahead.
really quick, please?
Sorry.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I just want to share because for the longest time in my life, I felt like this was my biggest curse. And I feel like it's my biggest strength now that I'm an adult, and I see it in so many of the clients I work with who are ADHDers, is how intensely emotionally connected I am. I feel things so much. And growing up, I got labeled dramatic, too much, like I was a crier. I'm still a crier. But like to be able to like look at that now and recognize that emotionality and vulnerability is what allows me to connect one-on-one with a person in a way that another person who's not as attuned to their feelings and other people's feelings might not be able to do. And I just like, I really thought that this was a hindrance for me. So I definitely needed to learn some emotion regulation skills in order to be able to harness it in the way I needed to. But now that I have, it really allows me to have much deeper connections with people than I think a lot of people who don't have that connection are able to.
Beautiful and incredibly well said, ma'am.
So I do want to jump in because we've only got about 6 more minutes before we hand over to our audience to ask questions. So I did mention that I would ask a question about hyperfocus, but I'm going to move on from that one. So I'm just going to name that's called perseveration. It's getting stuck on a task. And very often it relates to my own inability to initiate tasks, which I think sometimes people think is like an avoidance of the ability or like wanting to do something. And in fact, it's that if I start, I'll get stuck and won't be able to pivot to something else. But I do want to make sure we have time to talk about burnout and medication before we hand it over to our lovely audience. So we have like a fair number of questions related to burnout, but I'm going to kind of just go with one and then let you guys run with it since we don't have too long. So I'm just going to go with what are some signs of burnout in people with ADHD and how can we like prevent and or manage it? And sorry, Brendan.
No, it's okay. I went through a period of intense burnout. None of this is, I have podcast episodes about it. So what I say is not me being super vulnerable. One of my sons has obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was so bad that he was hospitalized for 3 months. So that was hard. At the same time, my dad was having significant health issues. So I was like in the thick of the sandwich generation. It ruined me. And I learned a lot about burnout. And so my definition of burnout is when you have been anxious for so long that it no longer motivates you. And since a lot of neurodiverse folks burn anxiety for fuel fairly regularly, to not be able to do that is really rough. And so that was where I was at. And I put myself, that was my sign, right? Like my biggest sign of burnout was like, oh, nothing makes me anxious enough to want to do anything. They could have been like, you're going to lose your house. And I would have been like, meh. Um, so what I ended up, I used Maslow's hierarchy of needs to put myself back together, where I just started at like biological needs and then safety needs and then connection, and moved up as I could until I was squared away. I'm still kind of burnt out a little bit, and it's been a couple of years, but it takes a while. With ADHD, you're more likely to get burned out because it's harder to manage things and it's harder to navigate with your weakened executive functions. So that's my lens on burnout in a nutshell.
I think the other challenge with burnout is actually hearkening back to what Becca was just talking about, is we do tend to feel things intensely, whether other people do or not. It's interesting because there's talk about how we kind of have this bend towards social justice, which I think is really fascinating. I don't know that I can really explain the neurobiology behind that per se at this time, but there does tend to be that, which I think goes along with the just deeply feeling, seeing the details, all of that kind of stuff. I'm a female physician and mother with ADHD and a learning disability, living and working in the state of Texas, taking care of teenagers. I'm burnt out. And I think, again, I think a lot of that comes from that emotionality side of things, as the energy output, the emotional output, the kind of daily battle to do small things, or what we think should be small things that actually take quite a bit of energy for us. And then you add to that the fact that we have sometimes a higher, it's not just ADHD, right? We also have families, we have work, we have chronic illness, we have this, we have that. And all of those things come into play. And we're not necessarily, and then we struggle with the consistency of putting those supports in place for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. But the other piece of it is, I always talk about how we're not dimmer switch people. We're flip switch people. It's on or it is off. So we are all the way on, whether that's our emotion, our motivation, our energy, our dedication, our focus, all of it. We're on or we are off. And so for me, I don't know that I can even necessarily always tell the difference between just burnout and my off switch, right? But when you run on high all the time and your only other option is off, it can be really hard to manage that. And before I give it up, can I just share my favorite Brendan Mahan quote?
Yes.
My favorite,
And
one
I'm
of my
not going to
favorite
let you give it
Brendan
up because
Mahan
I'm
quotes, which
actually
actually,
going to ask
by the
our
way,
med question after.
is on a sticker that I was given by somebody else at a conference recently. Brendan, I'll tell you about this later. It says, anxiety is the only thing you can burn for fuel and wind up with more of it when you're done.
It's a good quote.
That was Aurora. She gave you that?
Yeah.
So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and ask our med question, then we can always circle back to these topics as we're doing the Q&A for our audience members as well. So, and again, I'm going to kind of combine some questions here. So what are some of the pros and cons of taking ADHD medications? And then the relationship between ADHD medications or medication use and addiction risk.
Okay. So pros, we have extensive research that taking ADHD. So first of all, let me actually back that up a little bit. There's different kinds of ADHD medications. There's stimulant medications and there's non-stimulant medications. Most of what I'm going to talk about is the stimulant medications because that's what we have most of the data on, and that's still the gold standard, but that's not to say that I'm pooping on non-stimulant medications, to be clear. 85% of people with ADHD will have a positive response to at least one stimulant medication. That is actually insanely good if you look at medications and medication response and any other kind of chronic illness. Okay, so that's one thing that people need to be aware of. The other thing that people need to be aware of is the stimulant medications have been around from the 1930s and 40s. They hit the market in the 40s and 50s, depending on which molecule you're talking about. Okay, these are not new. Okay, we have reams of data now to show that optimal treatment of our ADHD, and when I say optimal treatment, I'm not saying only meds, okay? Nor am I saying meds are the right thing for everyone, okay? But optimal treatment for ADHD decreases risk for school failure, relationship failure, work failure, addiction, suicide, depression, anxiety, accidents, etc. Dr. Barkley's research has shown us that on average, people who are not treated or undertreated for the ADHD live 13 years shorter than people who are optimally treated or neurotypicals. There was research just recently that came out in, I want to say it was England, that actually showed more of an effect for women than for men. Okay. And we tend to live longer, so that tells you something. Now, does that mean people who don't treat their ADHD are going to die 13 years earlier than they would have? No, it's a statistic, right? But part of what pulls that statistic down and makes it as big as it is causes of early death like accidents and suicide. And those are things we don't like to talk about, but we have to. Okay. But then in addition to that, if we take care of our ADHD, we're also more likely to take care of our physical health, right? We're more likely to actually make that doctor's appointment or remember to take our other meds or remember to and try to and be able to initiate eating healthy or exercise or any of those kinds of things, right? So ADHD doesn't just affect school and work, it affects our entire lives. And so managing our ADHD affects our entire lives. Other pros include just simple things. And I've noticed in my life, the holy crud, this is how other people do it. Okay, cool. That's lovely. But yeah, so overall, this is why we talk about medication as part of optimal treatment of ADHD. Cons, of course, there's side effects. Of course, there's risks. There's side effects and risks with anything we do in medicine. Stimulant medications have a long list of common side effects. I won't bore you with that here. But overall, they've actually been shown, if they're taken in proper dosages under the care of a medical professional, they have been shown to be very safe and very effective. To the point of addiction, and then Brandon, I will shut up and let you talk. The research, again, is very, very clear. I'm not saying that these medications absolutely can be used as medications of abuse, and they can be used as medications of addiction, but they're at much higher doses than what we use for clinically treating ADHD, okay? Again, the research is so clear that treating our ADHD, including with stimulant medications, decreases our risk of substance use, substance abuse, and substance dependence. I actually take care of teenagers not only with ADHD, but like, for example, one of my other areas of specialty is eating disorders. And I do have kids with substance abuse. Now, I'm not a substance abuse specialist, so I usually link with somebody else who does that. But the data is strong enough, we will actually continue to use their ADHD medications when we're trying to treat those disorders if we see that there is benefit and if we can monitor them closely enough for their safety. Okay, now not everybody's going to do that because not everybody has that experience or that comfort level, okay? But that's how much we recognize that treating the underlying ADHD is critical for treating these other issues and disorders. Brendan.
Yeah, you hit side effects, and there's a linguistic thing that I get on my soapbox about that I want to make sure I say out loud. Go for it, dude. We talk about ADHD having symptoms and ADHD medication having side effects, and that language change means we don't compare them, and we should, right? Like we should either decide that the medication gives us symptoms or that the diseased condition, whatever, and does not just ADHD, but that like symptoms and side effects are the same kind of, right? Like if I take my ADHD meds and it means that, I don't know, I'm a little twitchy and I like grit my jaw, that's the side effects that happens for me. But I'm suddenly able to get places on time and do my homework and I'm driving safer. That I'll make
Right.
that trade, right? And
Right.
we want to know what the trade is. And because we have two different words, we often don't think of it as a trade. And I
Well,
just
and to
wanted to
that
say that out loud.
Yeah, and to that point, what we don't think about, and I'll often tell audiences, is there are side effects to not treating our ADHD.
Mhm.
And to that point, Brendan, when I use that language with families, they're like when you put it in the same language, to your point, all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, let's have that
Yeah.
conversation. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to say that medication is the end all be all perfect, going to fix everything, nor am I saying medication is the right choice for everyone. However, there is a lot of myths and misconceptions still out there about medication, and not just in the lay public, in the professionals too. So I'm on a mission.
All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions that we've already received from people in the chat. And if people would like to ask more questions, you can put them in the chat, or once I get through these ones, I'll start calling on people so you can use the raise hand feature, whichever you prefer. If you do, just as a reminder, if you do decide to speak out loud, then you do become part of like the video recording that goes up on YouTube in the future. So, there we go. So that's just a thing to be aware of. So our first question from our audience, and I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with names today. So Rosaba asked, what do the panelists think about the article on ADHD that was recently published in the New York Times? Did you guys?
Oh, how much time do we have? And thank you for asking that question. I'll let one of y'all go first.
I'll go first. I have lots of big feelings about it. I will say this. I'm not surprised. During the pandemic, I wrote an article for the New York Times with a world-renowned doctor, the one who told us all to wear masks before anybody else. And the New York Times told me that I should not be trying to get children to play, even though we have a worldwide mental health crisis as the result of children not being able to play. And so I was disappointed, but I had already been disappointed in them. So I'm glad people are speaking out. I think it goes back to the enormous stigma that people bear who have ADHD. Carolyn just spoke to medication and things, and people face unbelievable stigma in their daily life that I wish I could eliminate. So I will just use the word disappointed.
I would agree with everything Caroline said. In addition to that, it is poor journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that truthfully and without reservation, because they took out of context data from one of our most critical studies. They misquoted and took out of context professionals who I respect deeply. And that is not, I can't forgive that. When you use respected people and respected data to misrepresent and further a clear agenda, that is not journalism. That is not journalism. Okay? And I was more surprised than Caroline, but to be perfectly honest, is because I don't have the experience Caroline has with writing for these publications, and frankly, reading a lot of them because I don't like to read. But I was very, very, very disappointed. And what I am happy about. I'm not happy that we need to respond. But I am happy that there has been quite a response, that a lot of professionals are speaking out, a lot of lay people are speaking out. I am part of several organizations, many of whom are in the process of putting together formal responses, but they are wanting to do so very thoughtfully, which I also very much respect. Because the other side of this is as much as and I actually haven't responded publicly to it myself, although I'm planning to, because I had to kind of manage my own initial response. And I do think it's important. Well, I don't agree with, I'm very disappointed in the article, as Caroline said. I do think it's important to, on the other hand, recognize why it was able to get published in the first place. And it's fear and concern and stigma. And I don't want to discount the fear and concern on the part of parents or adults with ADHD who just don't feel like they know where to get solid data, right? And solid information. But that's also why it makes me that upset. Because this is not just, Wikipedia or some random whatever. This is a publication that a lot of people do look to and respect. And so for them to read this in that publication gives it validity it shouldn't have. And it's just going to confuse people and scare people and harm the very people that everybody on this panel spend every day, all day trying to help. And that's incredibly upsetting.
And my question, just real quick, is would you see an article published questioning validity of research on depression or anxiety, something that isn't considered like neurotype, but people understand
fair
more.
These days, who knows?
Fair.
But it is a good question to ask.
It's just, I guess, the comment on how articles and things like that do tend to target like ADHD, autism, over depression, anxiety, trauma.
Agreed.
All right, so our next question, we have two questions from SB. One is, I'm looking to work on my executive functioning skills as a young 20-year-old with ADHD. Can you recommend any resources or knowledge on this?
One moment, please.
Are you getting the book?
I just got to find it. There you go.
Brendan's getting you resources. Hold on.
Extra Focus by Jesse Anderson is a good primer for ADHD, especially if you're in your 20s. Yeah, I interviewed him for the podcast, so any book that I interviewed people for,
he's got a good Substack too.
Yeah, and it's not long, so that's what I mean when I say primer. Like, it's not a long book. Otherwise, check out How to ADHD on YouTube. Check out Hacking Your ADHD, the podcast, ADHD Essentials, which is my show. It's a little more parenting, but it's not exclusively parenting, so that's a good way to go too.
Also, I'm keeping track of all these resources, so don't stress about writing them all down. I'll make sure they're in an email for you.
I just texted a friend of mine yesterday, so I'm going to go into my text because I made a whole list for her. I just have to find it. And I'll shut up too, because I'm sure other people have resources. I just answered this question yesterday. So, Your Brain's Not Broken by Tamara Rozier. That's the one.
Go team.
Tamara. Seth
He also
Pearl
just wrote another one about families, which is great too.
Also, Healthy Gamer GG on YouTube has good stuff. It's not just ADHD, but he speaks to men, and this is a 20-year-old man, right? 20-year-old guy.
It doesn't say.
Doesn't say. All right, then never mind. And Dr. Tracy Marks has got good stuff.
Okay, awesome. And then SB's follow-up question was, unable to take prescription ADHD medications that would what would be other effective methods for focus?
So one of the things we actually have the best research for other than medication is physical activity. There's a great book called Spark
I was just gonna say Spark.
by Dr. Rady, who's phenomenal. It's fascinating, and it's on audiobook. Everything I recommend has an audiobook because learning disability and reading. So you can walk, you can exercise, you can fidget while you listen. But no, so there's really good information on physical activity, both cardio, but also other forms of physical activity like balance, yoga, martial arts, etc. So that can be really helpful. There are some supplements out there that are starting to have some decent data behind them, like magnesium and B6. There's a little bit on saffron. But there's most of the data on the supplements show that they can be helpful, but they're not going to be as helpful as a stimulant medication. But if you can't take a stimulant, it might be worth looking into some of those. The Finally Focused is a pretty good book, although that's a little bit more for, not that lay people obviously can't read it, but it's intended more for like providers.
Dopamine
But
menus,
those are the two.
Carolyn.
What?
What about dopamine menus? I'm a huge believer in I believe we're all just driven and we need
Yeah,
to have
yeah.
dopamine. And so I
Reading
love
those
dopamine
things.
menus that can,
Yeah.
wow, like how do I get that dopamine? Because,
Yep.
we're going to try to seek it in good ways or bad ways. So if you
Love that.
use a dopamine menu to get you started, then and to sort of have in those moments of sort of lag or distraction or motivational challenge, it can really help, I think.
Can you give a little more specifics of like some of the stuff that might be on that?
Okay, so my personal favorite thing to do is that I run on a treadmill and I listen to Rocky, the
Yes.
fifth one with the Russian from the 80s. But also seriously, jumping jacks, eating bananas, listening to music. There's some evidence that doing some jumping jacks or some squats can actually like flush anxiety from your body. I'm a super, super anxious person, so I'm constantly like, if I could do anything to flush out the anxiety, I will. I also, a lot of people do different types of noise and sound. So there's white noise and there's, um, other different types of noise people listen to. And that can help and that can provide dopamine. So just off the top of my head, but I think those menus, along with what Carolyn's saying, just they're so helpful. And I'm a fan of like, I carry things with me.
Yeah. The other thing I want
Um,
to just chime in real quick on the medicine, I'll be really quick, but
mhm.
and I'm not going to ask this person to go into detail, but there certainly are people who cannot take the medication either because they have another health issue or something that prevents them from doing that, or what have you. But also often just know that so many times I come across folks who think they can't take the medicines or can't tolerate the medicines. And when I dig into their history, they actually haven't tried all of them or appropriate doses of all of them. And there's so many options now, that just know that like sometimes it's not that you can't, it's that you haven't found the right one, and finding a provider who can help you figure that out can be really helpful too.
Okay. So we're very close to the end of time, but are you guys open to answering just a couple more questions? Okay, awesome. Great, because the next one's from my lovely friend Meredith, and she asked, can you please elaborate on how ADHD correlates with symptoms of anxiety and depression?
So I think it is connected. The research, and what I mean by that is that the research is really clear that these things start when kids are really young and accelerate over time. It sort of snowballs out of control. Maybe you're anxious in a social setting because I know someone like me talking a lot, you get feedback about how you're talking too much. So then I get anxious about how much space I'm taking up because that's feedback that I got, right? And then that anxiety starts to sort of build over time. And we get more negative evaluations from family members, peers, teachers. Sometimes my teachers really like me, but but I had challenges in those other demographics, right? And so considering how the anxiety maybe starts in response to some of the ADHD traits. And as we were talking about earlier, how they might affect the people around us. Depression, I know I was labeled depressed before anything else because as I said, I'm a crier, and also, feeling bad, being bullied, having those negative peer experiences. What's more visible? Seeing someone who's not engaged in interests, who's struggling to get along with peers, who is having these sort of emotional challenges. And then what happens? You get more isolated, you get more anxious, and over time, that becomes more challenging. So I think maybe you might already be prone to one of those things, to depression, anxiety, and then either genetically, environmentally, all of the above. And then it just kind of gets pushed over. We have our emotion regulation skills or challenges, executive functioning skills and challenges. And I think the other piece, which we haven't specifically touched on, but we've talked around, is the idea of having a spiky profile, having really strong skills in some areas and really big challenges in others. And so a lot of times the messaging that we're getting is mixed around how we're showing up. Like, oh gosh, you focused so well when you were writing that assignment, but then when you came to the math test, it was like you never even looked at the stuff, right? And so, or you're so good at talking to people, but then you have these big emotional explosions. And so also, it's hard not to get anxious or depressed when you feel like you're supposed to be doing better than you are in all areas, because you can do it sometimes and in some areas and not in others.
There's also a potential genetic and biochemical correlation as well, with certain neural pathways and just the epidemiology running in families. So you kind of get it from both sides, right? You get the genetic and biochemical side of things, and then you get the exactly what Becca was just talking about, social side of things. And so yeah, so regardless of how it happens or why, the data is pretty clear that I call them the Three Musketeers. They're just best buddies and they skip down the sidewalk holding hands, and it's super fun. And especially for women, because to Becca's point, a lot of times women and girls get diagnosed first with depression and anxiety, both because we just don't present the same way with ADHD, but also because for some reason socially, we assume depression and anxiety happens more in women and ADHD happens more in men.
And if
Yeah.
you're treating medication wise anxiety or depression, when there's an underlying root cause of ADHD, what happens? I'll ask the doctor.
So that's interesting because and it used to be actually the old paradigm was that you treated everything but ADHD first, or looked at everything but ADHD first to see what you had left over. And only after you dealt with all of that could you diagnose ADHD, which thank goodness we're moving away from that. But sometimes you make the ADHD, you make the anxiety or depression better, and you can actually see the ADHD clearer. But there's also times, and this is what I teach my students and residents and when I lecture, is if the condition you think you're treating is not getting better with conventional treatment, look for what you've missed, right? And so sometimes people will treat for depression and anxiety, and maybe it gets a little bit better, but it doesn't get all the way better. Or maybe it doesn't get better at all. And it's because that's not the actual underlying issue. The underlying issue is actually the ADHD or whatever else.
And one thing, and Carolyn, please feel free to tell me if I'm wrong on this. I'm comfortable being wrong. But another component here, and this part I'm right about, is like anxiety. I like to think of anxiety as being best friends with everything, right? Like if I get cancer, I'm going to start getting anxiety too, right? Like if stuff's not working, I'm just going to be more anxious. And this is the part I'm comfortable being wrong on. I've noticed that every now and then something will come along that'll seem like the miracle cure that fixes everything. Most recently, marijuana was that. And I kind of land at like, that probably just treats anxiety, right? Like it probably is just tamping down the anxiety. So it makes it seem like all this other stuff is better, except that it's not. It's just the anxiety is reduced by whatever magic cure
Temporarily.
that isn't FDA regulated has been found?
Temporarily.
Temporarily, right? Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Actually makes it worse in the long run, to be
Well,
clear.
yeah, marijuana does, yeah. But even like for a while there, they were like mindfulness fixes everything, and then like, no, it doesn't. It just makes you less anxious.
Right. No, I actually agree with you. And it's interesting because, of course, anxiety makes anything harder, right? Whether it's depression,
Hmm.
ADHD, what have you. It's also a coping mechanism, right? And it works until it doesn't, right? Um, and and yeah, when your anxiety is under better control, you can manage other things better. But obviously sometimes, like I said, sometimes for my patients with ADHD, when we manage the anxiety, it's like, oh, there's the ADHD. There it is. It was hiding. It was hiding under your anxiety. Okay, cool.
All right, Carolyn,
Mhm.
I'm okay with being wrong too, but I see the flip side in my work with clients and kids at my internship site where sometimes when we treat the ADHD, the anxiety also goes down, right? Because
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
all of a sudden all of those things that were so hard to keep track of or, all of those things can start to feel a little bit more manageable and it feels
Yep.
less stressful.
That's absolutely correct. And I just real quick, because I know we need to move on. But so
Yeah.
when people always ask me which do you treat first, and there
Mhm.
is no one answer because it depends on the person for exactly what you just said. If I know ADHD is there and I don't know, I'm not sure if the anxiety is separate from or completely due to the ADHD, I will treat the ADHD first for
Mhm.
exactly that reason. Because I have seen ADHD and depression not just improve, completely resolve. I actually had a young lady with an eating disorder where the eating disorder, the depression, the anxiety completely resolved when we diagnosed and properly treated her ADHD. That's
Mhm.
rare, but it happens. Um, there are times where I'll treat the anxiety first, and there's times where we'll go back and forth. And if I'm not sure, I'm just very honest with the family of like, look, I see both these things. I'm not sure exactly which way we need to go, and we're likely going to have to go back and forth and make adjustments. These are the choices for how do we start, and we make the decision as a team together. And it depends on the kid or the family or the person, kind of what direction we go first. And I also tell them it's okay if we're wrong. If this isn't what works, we're going to shift gears. Because exactly to your point, yes.
All righty. So thank you so much. Our next question is, so this is from Ava. I do not have ADHD, but I'm tutoring a fourth grader, a boy in math and English and reading. I'm sorry. I'm tutoring a fourth grader in math, English, and reading who does. He is incredibly smart and knows the information, but has a hard time keeping his eyes focused on the actual paper. Any tips or tricks?
I used to be an English teacher. A wicked got you. An index card. You just get an index card, use it as a bookmark, stick it underneath the lines, right? To like slide below each line or above, depending on where you are on the page. Yeah, just like that. Um, it's amazing how useful that is. They have bookmarks that are like sort of look like a ruler and it's clear in the middle. So it might be like a yellow strip on the top and the bottom and the middle is clear that you can also use to stay there. He can also listen to books on tape if that's a possibility. That counts as reading, depending on what the assignment is and what kind of stuff he needs to do. If you're tutoring him, read to him. That's valid. He's still getting the information. You can talk it through better. Depending on what aspect of reading you're supposed to be doing with him. There's a limited amount of information here, but and let him do something else while he's reading, right? Walk on a treadmill. Um, there's a limit to what you can do. Like I've been able to do sit-ups and read a book at the same time, but not everybody can do that. It's a little hard. But like if he can take a walk on a treadmill and read the book at the same time, or like stand on one foot while he reads or something like that, that can help too.
Here's the other thing I'll add to that as someone who had that same struggle her whole life. Um, exactly. That rule, I actually used that when I was a kid. I would also, all the way into medical school, I would actually not study with other people so that I could read out loud to myself while following my finger. Okay. If it didn't have an audiobook, if it had an audiobook, I would listen to the audiobook or someone would read it to me while I looked at the page, while I had my finger or the ruler or a highlighter. I needed something to help me track. And I actually was one of those kids that would highlight everything. And it wasn't until I got to college that the learning specialist there, she said, how do you study? I said, well, I don't know. I do it all wrong. And she goes, what do you mean you're at Davidson? I think you did just fine. How do you do it? And I said, well, I highlight everything. And she was the first one to explain to me that I highlighted everything because it helped me track. And when I did that, I didn't have to go back and study it because I remembered it.
Yep. As somebody currently completing my master's in counseling, I highlight everything and I use different colors. It keeps me engaged because I have it on my like digital thing and it's, I have my little palette and that's how I get through 100%.
I think anything that can make it a more interactive process helps too, right? Like, so I'm not just like having to stare at something for a long time. I was a reader, but I still need help focusing. So
and using all of
alternating
our
reading.
senses. Yeah, using all of our, because if all of our senses are engaged, there isn't a rogue one that can distract us.
And let them write in the book and take notes in the book and that kind of stuff if possible. That'll work too. Like even if he's just responding to what is written there, like this is good, this is dumb, I agree, I disagree. All of this stuff means X, Y, and Z, whatever kind of this reminds me of this other thing. We have text connections where text to text, text to self, text to world, right? So like encourage him to do that. Connect this text to another text, which can include a book or a TV show or a movie or a radio thing he heard. Text to self is how it relates to me. And then text to world is how this connects to the larger world or concepts I'm learning in school or something like that. All of that stuff will get him more aggressively reading and more depth.
And for me, it's always helped like writing it out myself, even, I mean, depending on the text, right? But when I'm listening to people talk, I write down word by word when I can, right? Like these are the kind of things that give me that tactile sensation. It helps me remember, it helps me stay focused so I'm not doing something else, right?
And also you can get an accommodation in school to be able to, you can even get an SAT accommodation to read aloud and be alone in a room. Now, getting accommodations in school can be a battle, but I definitely think like anyone who's dyslexic, like Carolyn and I are, anyone who has those kind of challenges in addition to ADHD, sometimes the environment is incredibly important. And we talked about talking to ourselves. Like I read aloud everything my entire academic career. And when I was once at college, I remember someone knocked on my door and they're like, who are you talking to? And I was like, oh, I'm reading Middlemarch out loud because I have to sit here and read it in 1 week because I was late. And it's just it's more of an experiential thing. So you can get those accommodations in school if you have the testing and the support.
I have one more question from our, thank you again, everybody. And I have one more question from our audience at this point. So Michelle asked, do you have good resources for boys, in particular young Black elementary boys who are struggling with ADHD symptoms in their public school system, social skills, executive functioning, or other supports that I might not be thinking of?
I do just want to note that any supports that don't include the adults in the kids' lives is going to miss because so much of what is happening for these kids who are struggling with ADHD traits in the classroom is being misunderstood, giving negative feedback for the ways that they present, especially for people, the global majority, these Black and brown kids in the classroom, were more likely already to be negatively evaluated by teachers just because of implicit bias. So knowing that, sure, we can teach like more normative social skills, emotion regulation, but really understanding of what ADHD is and how it shows up for the people around this kid. I think the research is pretty clear that that makes a bigger difference. Mm-hmm. And working with shame, working on supporting kids with shame and helping to reduce that, because that's where a lot of the spiral continues.
Yeah, Becca, you just took all the words out of my mouth. I don't need to say any much, but yes, definitely involve the family structure and see what's going on there. And then off the top of my head, Cheryl Poe She is the creator of Advocating for Kids. She works primarily with Black and Brown folks in school settings for IEPs. She's my go-to for IEPs and 504 plans. She knows like ins and outs. And she's really, even though she's based in Virginia, she works nationally. But like Becca was saying, definitely, engage with the family, talk about the adults and all the people that are influenced in that little person's life to help find the support for whatever they're looking for.
And
Now, go ahead, Brendan.
just
Sorry.
real quick, if mom and dad need to learn about ADHD, I can do that in like an hour or two, and I'm not going to charge you. So just like Brendan at ADHDessentials.com, or I'm sure there's something that'll help you find me. Yeah, that I do that all the time, and I'm not charging because that's I offered.
And I want to say that I wrote Why Will No One Play With Me so that parents who didn't have access to professionals could teach their children social skills and how to make friends. That's literally why I did it. Often professionals will come up to me and say, yeah, but can't people just hire someone? And I'm like, no, not everybody can hire someone. So that is the book I wrote 6 years ago, and it's meant for parents. It's very user friendly. So that's something that I did literally specifically so people could help their kid. Because either way, we're on the front lines. Like, I'm a parent and I have to learn things to help my kid because I'm there 99.9% of the time. So I just want to mention that. And I have a ton of free stuff, CarolineMcGuireAuthor.com on my website.
And again, I'll make sure everybody has these links.
And that was actually, I was actually gonna recommend Caroline's book. So
Well, I just want everyone, that's why I did
that.
it.
Alrighty. So with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your vast knowledge on supporting people with ADHD and your experience living with ADHD. And thank you for all of your engagement and participation in the Chris Walsh Center ADHD panel. Before we wrap up, I'd like to take a moment to share some of our upcoming events and announcements. So this Wednesday at 7 p.m., our ongoing caregiver support group will hold its next session. It's drop-in, so if you haven't been before, that's fine. It is specifically for caregivers of children with unmet needs. So yeah, please join us. And then next Thursday, the last training in our SEL for Educators series is taking place, Resilience and the Embodied Classroom, with Dr. Simone Cotraba at 4:30 p.m. and that's worth 1.5 PDPs. And you can find the registration links for these events in the chat and in our follow-up email. Pretty sure Ingrid's going to be putting those in the chat for you. And then this year marks 5 years of the Chris Walsh Center providing free resources and programming for families and educators. With your support, we can continue to expand our reach and impact even more lives. If you're able, we encourage you to be part of this important next step. Every donation, big or small, helps us provide these essential services at no cost to those who need them most. And together we can achieve so much more. So again, we'll put a link to donate in the chat. And again, every little bit helps. And we also have a survey that is incredibly important. I believe Therese mentioned it in the beginning, that again, all of this is grant funded. And so the more information and feedback we get from you, the more we're able to show the work that we're doing, as well as making sure that we continue to provide meaningful programming like that people are looking for. So we ask questions about what really matters to you. And again, Ingrid, that link is also somewhere in this document. So if you want to find that and put that in the chat as well. And again, all of these links I'll send out as well. But the survey we do tend to find if people do it right after the event, we tend to get more responses. So we'd really appreciate if you take some time to do that one. And thank you again for being here. We appreciate your time, your engagement, and your support. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. And we hope you have a wonderful evening. And if all my lovely panelists could stay on, that would be great. And there was lots of thank yous in the chat that I didn't read out to you guys. So plenty of people were thanking you in the chat.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.